Welcome to the second part of the Zoo Complete Video Primer. This one's going to be specifically talking about Tribal or Domain Zoo. And if you wanted to check out any of the other specific archetypes of Zoo, links to that in the description below, as well as the mega overarching primer. But this one is specifically talking about Domain and Tribal Zoo as it refers to in modern. Alright guys, so let's talk about what is Domain Zoo? Well, Domain Zoo plays a lot like normal Zoo, but the main difference, which again is like a valuing your creatures kind of deal, but the main difference is its burn is, for lack of a better word, mega charged. There is no better burn, with the exception of maybe the burn deck, that rocks burn the same way that Zoo does. And even in that respect, the burn deck usually does 1 mana, 3 damage, while the Domain Zoo rocks 2 mana, 5 damage. And it's also willing to play all colors, which means it's very interested in having value creatures of not only the Naya colors, but also anything that dips into blue or anything that dips into black. So, to lack of a better word, we talked about how normal Zoo feels like a Fire Mage burning path for its creatures to wreck face. That's what normal Zoo feels like. This specifically feels like that, but you also might be closer to a fire-breathing dragon. You are going to be not only clearing the way with burn to let your creatures wreck face, but you also have at your disposal explosive fire. Why should you play Domain Zoo? Well, if you like all the burn in the world, playing the best of the burn you could possibly play with creatures, then this is going to be your kind of deck. If you like turning must deal with threats the minute they get put out there sideways and attacking with them, this is your deck. If you like playing big impact spells where you literally say, I'm going to do this, if you cannot answer it, you will die, then this is your deck. But if you don't like unstable mana bases and misogynism, then this is not your deck. The deck has a very unstable mana base in the fact that it's trying to achieve domain simply to do extra damage most of the time. So you want to make sure that you can very, very, very easily, if not prepared, be blown out of the water by someone screwing with your mana base or actually checking your greed. And also, a lot of the time, you're going to go to 14 on turn 2, maybe even 12 on turn 3. It's worth noting that this deck will hurt yourself a lot to achieve that explosive sort of, I play with everything I want kind of feel. And how do you build a Domain Zoo deck? Well, you're going to take the key card in the deck, which is Tribal Flames, and you're going to build a little bit around that. You've got Lightning Bolt, which is great, dealing a ton of damage and being versatile removal, and Lightning Helix, which is right up there with Lightning Bolt. And then you're going to take some really good creatures. You're going to take Deathrite Shaman and Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf will reliably be 4/5, if not bigger, if you're killing things like Planeswalkers. So it's worth noting that he's just a huge threat. And Deathrite Shaman's in there also because he does everything this deck wants to do. He'll deal extra damage to the face, and not only that, it can't be sort of retargeted because its opponent loses life. He is extra graveyard hate, which is great, something you want to think of. He will gain you life, which as you're hurting yourself a lot, may be something that you really, really need. And he'll also mana ramp you into big threats, making your turn 2 suddenly a turn 3 threat on turn 2 can just win you the game. So these guys do pretty much everything you want to do. And what you do from there is a little bit more versatile. Here are basically your other creature options. You can do other creatures other than this, and if you want to see some other creatures that you can pull, check the main Zoo primer. But these are the ones you're basically want to stick to. These are the tried and true ones. These are the ones that have won GPs or winning online dailies or have even gone to Worlds. Experiment 1 is an interesting card because if you're using things like Geist of St. Taft, or if you're using Voice of Resurgence, he gets pumped very, very easily. He also gets pumped by the obligatory Curd Ape and Loom Lion-esque thing. Even Snapcaster pumps him once. Snapcaster is a good one too. You can use him as a full 4 of, although most decks try to stay towards 2 to 3 of him, and he's basically just extra burn. He can deal extra damage, if need be, just by tapping dudes sideways, but he allows you to flash back your most important spell, Tribal Flames, to really get like 10 damage in there. Can just steal a game. Loom Lion and Curd Ape, again, are obligatory, very strong 1-mana creatures. If you could, you would be using Wild Noctowl, but that is banned. Geist of St. Taft is another form of things you can do. Since you're already playing blue, you might as well use that mana that you've got to put out a very strong creature. Again, this deck focuses on its burn, so it's going to clear the path much easier than other Zoo decks are doing it. So Geist of St. Taft will never really die and will be hitting for 6 damage a turn, which is huge. Voice of Resurgence is great because it allows you some redundancy against removal spells. Plus, it also gives you some extra game against Control, even though Control is not the worst matchup in the world. Goblin Guide is in the strictly more punch, really quickly, speedy versions. Because, again, he's a hasty 1-mana creature that deals 2 damage. Noble Hierarch is sort of your 5th to 8th type of Mana Dork if you want to go extra Mana Dorks after doing Deathrite Shaman. Her Exalted Trigger is never useless. Step Links also works in that very punchy type of Domain Zoo where it's trying to do a lot of damage in. Since you're already using fetches, you're already cracking them constantly to get more of the domain mana open. Step Links can do a gruesome amount of damage early on. Loxodon Smiter, again, coming in as a 3-drop if you're not trying to do Geist of St. Taft. He does a lot of damage against like the Rock-esque decks. Moving on, here's your other spells you can do. These include other burn and other sorts of things. Abrupt Decay, again, like Geist of St. Taft, you're already using extra colors. You might as well think about using black, and Abrupt Decay will do it there. Lingering Souls is great because Lingering Souls, again, using black, you're going to get 4 1/1 flying tokens. They're great to do flying offense, especially with Exalted Triggers or Elspeth the Knight Errant pumps. Not to mention, they can be amazing chump blockers, allowing you to have a little bit of game against the aggro deck, even if you're taking a ton of mana damage, so that way you can still block things. Boros Charm is really awesome because it deals 4 damage for 2 mana. It also prevents against wraths for your creatures, and even a cute trick that you can do is give Might of Alara and Boros Charm at the same turn to do something ridiculous like 12 damage. It's very possible to do that, even more occasionally. Johnny Vargent is also worth mentioning that it has extra burn built in. Path to Exile is the best removal spell that you could be using for strictly creatures, so it's worth noting that you should probably be using 2 to 4 Path to Exiles in your main deck. A Pillar of Flame's worth noting too. There's always a great amount of creatures that interact with the graveyard. Pillar of Flame gets around that. A big one's Kitchen Finks. And again, I said Might of Lara allowing for giant pumps. It can also be used as pseudo removal. Your lands, this is a little bit more tricky because it really depends on what you're doing with your extra spells and your extra dudes to know what kind of mana you want. But you're going to look at these constant variables. You're going to want 12 to 14 fetch lands at least. You're going to want 2 to 3 basics, and you don't really change much about that. And you're going to want 5 to 7 shock lands. And generally, all those shock lands will be different. You're not going to want... if you're going to do 5, you're going to do 5. You know, you're just going to want more or less 5 single types of shock lands. Now you want your land camp to be around 20 if you're doing the more speedy punch version, and 22 if you're going to be going a little bit more control-esque. By control, I mean more removal-esque. Tips to your mana, and I think this is very important to talk about before we even go into any further about the Domain Zoo. There is a very specific type of order you want to do for your mana. And that is you're going to want your Naya colors right away, and then your added color And if your added color is blue, you're going to want to switch what I wrote down there. If your added color is blue, you're going to want to keep it that way. If your added color is black, you're going to want to switch it up. But right now, as the domain zoo works and the zoos that I'm showing, you're going to want to do it in this order. The first crack, you're going to want to get a Temple Garden. The second crack, you're going to want to get a Steam Flint. And the third crack, you're going to be doing a Blood Crypt. I'm going to try to keep to that when I'm playing so that you guys can see that and get a good habit built in. But if you have played this enough, like me, you can mess with it a little bit, but you want to keep that in mind that you're going to always turn one want a Mana Dork or a Step Links. Again, that being the Temple Garden mana. Turn 2, you're going to want access to red, most definitely, so that you can have access to any of the burn you choose, like Lightning Helix. And you're going to want access to blue, so that way you can cast what do you call it? A Geist of St. Taft. Then after that, it's less important what you get, but you probably want to get a red mana, so you can still have access to burn, even though you might be using the Temple Garden or something, or you might be using the Steam Vent for something else. Especially if turn 3 you're going to be casting a full paid with your mana, a full paid Geist of St. Taft. You're going to need that blue mana, and it's worth noting that you might want access to red. But black comes afterwards. You can sort of do black whenever you want, so long as you do it before you cast the domain spells. All right, so we're going to be talking a bit more about the meta. I didn't touch about this at all in the main zoo primer, mostly because I wanted to be able to update this more often. And currently, this is what you're going to look at in the modern meta. And this is not just Tier 1, but also Tier 1.5. You're going to be looking at rock decks. That's Jund, Junk, even some types of rug. Not rug, sorry, but bug. Basically, it's got that black-green shell with an extra color, or it's just black-green. You're going to be looking at Affinity, you're going to be looking at Hexproof, you're going to be looking at Control, Escape Shift, Tron, Pod, Twin, Living End, Death and Taxes, as well as Hate Bears. They're kind of almost the same deck. Merfolk, Zoo, Storm, Infect, Delver, Soul Sisters, and Burn Red Deck wins, also lumped in sort of the same deal. So let's talk about those decks. Hexproof. Hexproof is going to be wanting to put as many auras on the creatures as possible and destroy you. Now, you're not going to be able to kill their creatures because most of their creatures have Hexproof. So what you got to do is you got to attack their auras. Their creatures are super weak without those auras. So we're going to look at Destructive Revelry, which is sort of a catch-all and my suggestion for your sideboard, as well as Wear and Tear, which is also a great catch-all answer. You're going to be looking at Declamor. That's going to be in your sideboard if you're worried about things more like Wormcoil Engine. You're going to be looking at things like Back to Nature if you have a ton of Hexproof and you need to deal with Hexproof. Specifically, Back to Nature is the best thing you can do. Control. Mostly right now, this is American Control, and what it's going to try to do is use a flurry of removal spells, mostly burn, to kill your weenies, and a flurry of counter spells to basically just do a catch-all answer before they can land a either a Snapcaster and just slowly win, or a Johnny Vengeance and take it up and win, or a mostly Celestial Colonnade and kill you. And here's your choices. You're going to want to think about Mana Greed stuff like Molten Rain, and just pretty much only Molten Rain because you're going to be using it more as a tempo card here. Vines of Vastwood to null out their removal, or Voice of Resurgence to really gain value against the control deck. You should note that you have a good matchup against the control deck anyway, so you don't need to devote sideboard options. It's just if any of these are in your sideboard for any other reason, you might want to think about bringing them in. Really, you've got a great game against control because as long as you can do some early beatdown and then wait for your chance to slip in a Tribal Flames, you'll win. Rock decks. Okay, so rock decks are a little bit of a hard matchup for this deck, and by a little bit, I mean you really need to just be explosive. Your main deck isn't too bad. Your main deck, you're going to be thinking about just simply racing and then using your Tribal Flames and your burn as reach. What you want to do side deck is to think about things like Molten Rain, specifically if it's a green, black, and some other colored deck, then you're going to want to nuke that other color so that it ruins their game plan, or you want to hit things like their man lands with it. Binds of Vastwood's great because it nulls out their removal and allows you to gain value for extra damage. And Path to Exile, you want to think about taking even out Bolts, because Path to Exile will clear the way a lot better against things like Tarmogoyf. Scapeshift and Tron. This is an interesting one, but they're both lumped in the same deal because this deck specifically does the same sort of deal to it. You can use any of the land hates that I've shown, and they're going to be in red, as you see. You can use tutor hates like Aven Mindcensor, and you can just wait for them to do their big mana deal and then just keep remanding it, and that'll buy you time. Meanwhile, in the main deck, or just your game 1 and 1, that you're going to want to just be aggressive. You don't have a bad matchup against these guys. The only bad thing that could happen is that they drop a Wurmcoil, which, not on here, if you know they're going to be trying to drop a Wurmcoil, Declaimer is a great, great card for that. You're going to go ahead and just race. You really don't have to worry about it too much, because even if they drop the Wurmcoil, unlike Gruul Zoo, where you need to win by swinging with your creatures, you could probably just finish the game with Burn. Affinity. There is, like I've said in the main Zoo primer, a million choices for this matchup. Affinity is a great, great matchup, strictly because after sideboard, it's almost impossible for them to win. You can do things like Shatterstorm and Creeping Corrosion, which will just win you the game upon casting it. Stony Silence, which will really screw them over and can't let them do their really cool thing. I've actually doubled up on Volcanic Fallout, but it should have been a Pyroclasm. Pyroclasm and Volcanic Fallout will just wipe their side of the board and really screw them over. Or you can do your normal artifact hate, which would be Ancient Grudge, Destructive Revelry, or Wear and Tear, and that will just sort of clear the field, keep them off tempo, and let your aggro win out. War Mage is also really great. It comes down very cheaply. It doesn't do the same deal as Creeping Corrosion or Shatterstorm, but it pretty much feels like it anyways, because you are forcing them to more or less lose the game right away. Pod. Declaimer shows up because if it's in your sideboard, you are already going to have it, and it's worth putting in to get rid of the pod. Same thing with Destructive Revelry and Ancient Grudge. And Wear and Tear. But there are better answers, and Stony Silence is one of the best answers you can choose. Aven Mindcensor is also a great answer, and Topher Orb is super cool too. Not listed is Grafdigger's Cage. I didn't put Grafdigger's Cage in it because in current meta against Living End it does nothing, and Living End is a deck that's worth considering, and we'll get to that. But Grafdigger's Cage, if you have it, great against it. Topher Orb stops the interactions from their enter the battlefield clauses, allowing them not to combo out, although it doesn't stop the deck entirely. Aven Mindcensor screws over Pod and any of their search stuff that they've got. And then the rest are just good cards like Pillar of Flame, Killing Finks. Twin. You're going to see a lot of repeat cards here. Declaimer, Destructive Revelry, and Wear and Tear. They're very commonly found in your sideboard, and they will screw over Twin's Splinter Twin. But Path to Exile is awesome here because it gets rid of the card before it really multiplies. Topher Orb stops the effect entirely, making them have to win on their tempo-esque version, and Burning Tree Emissary will actually stop it too. Burning Tree Shaman, I should say. Burning Tree Shaman is interesting because he was a lot more widely used when Pod, Eggs, and Twin were the best decks in the meta. Now less so, that Eggs doesn't really exist. But Shaman will screw over Twin by every time they make a new Twin, they deal 1 damage and will probably die before they can actually do anything. Living End. Living End is a combo deck that just relies completely on its yard. You'll be able to see it when they start cycling off creatures. The best way to beat them is to nuke their graveyard. The second best way to beat them is when they cascade into Living End, remand the Living End, and it will screw them over. And any of these options here are great because they all nuke the graveyard. None of them are better than the other. You can basically choose which one you want. I would shy away a little bit from Rest in Peace because it nukes your Deathrite Shamans, your Snapcaster, and your Tarmogoyf. Derp. But the others are still great options. Death and Taxes and Hate Bears. This is a deck that uses usually they're going to have 2 swords main deck as well as 4 Ether Vials. Not always, but most of the time you'll find that they have that. And they're going to try to tax you and hate you until you die. The best thing you can do is get rid of their creatures. The reason why I put Path to Exile and Flame Slash in there is because that's really good creature removal. Qasali Pridemage is a little bit of an interesting one. I wouldn't actually suggest you side in Artifact Hate, because most of the time, unless you are going to see a Batterskull, in which case, after seeing a Batterskull, you have to side in Artifact Hate. But Qasali Pridemage will allow you to be aggro, especially if they don't have any of their artifacts out there for Ether Vials and their 2 swords, usually. But if it pops up, you can kill it, and that's nice. So Qasali Pridemage is a little bit better in that area. Merfolk. Again, you're going to see Path to Exile, Flame Slash, and Qasali Pridemage for the same reasons as Death and Taxes, and the reason why is because of their creatures, their lords will add up. You don't want to you want to make sure that you can get rid of all their lords with any sort of burn effects. And Qasali Pridemage hits Ether Vial, which allows them to double up on their lords quickly. So Qasali Pridemage gets rid of that. But Pyroclasm and Volcanic Fallout really are the best things you can do. There's nothing better. You just pretty much wipe them. They have an empty hand, and you'll win the game. But it should be noted that Merfolk's already a great matchup for us. Zoo is an interesting one. It's actually a really bad matchup for any if it's not Domain Zoo, if it's Gruul Zoo or any other kinds of zoo, it's actually a bad matchup for this because we take so much damage with our lands that they can capitalize on it, and it's very hard to remove their threats. It's not like Affinity or Merfolk where you can just Pyroclasm and win. You can't. Path to Exile and Flame Slash are great there. Kitchen Finks is the best thing you can do against it. Kitchen Finks, if you draw it, manages to take that matchup and suddenly turn it on its head where you become very favorable with that Kitchen Finks. Storm. This is going to be things like Thalia, which will tax them, or Aethersworn Canonist and Rule of Law, which will not let them play more than 1 spell a turn, really slowing them down, and you'll just win the game with those stuff. The Storm matchups, not good turn or game 1. If you can manage to get any of these out game 2 and they don't have a bounce spell, you'll win the game. Infect. Infect's already a great matchup. It's just a very good matchup to note. You want to have your Path to Exile and Flame Slash to kill creatures because that's their route of winning, although Volcanic Fallout and Pyroclasm will also do it. Less so Pyroclasm, more so Volcanic Fallout, because it just allows you to double up on more burn, and it will also hit their man lands. Delver, this is a great matchup already. You don't really need to worry much about it, but if you have Grim Lavamancer, Vines of Vastwood, or Boros Charm, they're all great. Boros Charm, Vines of Vastwood, great for when they try to screw up your tempo by hitting removal spells on you. Grim Lavamancer because it's repeatable removal, and they have very, very, very little amounts of creatures. Soul Sisters, Skullcrack and Flames of the Bloodhand are pretty self-explanatory. They don't let them gain life, so that's great for you. Pyroclasm and Volcanic Fallout will wipe their board and bring them back to square one, allowing you to just basically win the game. Torpor Orb's a weird one. It actually nulls out their sisters and a lot of enter the battlefield triggers, thus neutering them. So if you have it in your sideboard, it's worth putting in. Burn and Red Deck wins. Kitchen Finks, Rest from the Weary, and Leyline of Sanctity. The latter two you're not probably going to have in your sideboard, but if you do, it's worth it. Rest from the Weary is almost never in anyone's sideboards, but it is one of the best things you can do against Red Deck wins or Burn. And if you just have a ton of it in your meta, you might want to think about putting maybe a singleton Rest from the Weary in your deck. Kitchen Finks also being really good. And I think that's it, so let's talk about the matchups that you've got. I'm just going to scroll right through the matchups. Hexproof. Game 1 is a bad matchup. You're going to just need to try to outrace them. If you can't, you'll lose. Game after that, if you can get any of your kill enchantment spells and you kill any of their lifelink enchantments, you actually have a pretty good matchup. It's not the best in the world. You still need to race them, but you have a pretty good matchup now that they can't gain life. Control. Control's already a great matchup. You don't really need to do much about it. You naturally have a lot of answers with control and redundancy against their board wipes and their counters. Rock. This is actually a 50-50 matchup, I'd say. It's worse than 50% if you don't get your Tribal Flames and your good burn reach. It's better than 50% if you do manage to hit your very early damaging creatures and then your late reach burn. But again, sometimes the deck does not give you that, and it's going to be worse. Shapeshift and Tron, it's a pretty good matchup. You're going to be able to outrace them most of the time. You just got to watch out for things like their board wipes. Affinity. This is probably a bad game 1 with a great game 2 and 3. Game 2 and 3, there's no way they can win, in my opinion. You should have enough. As long as you have the sideboard slots, there's really no way they can win. Game 1, it's a little iffy. You need to make sure that your lands don't kill you with their speed while using your removal as very big end removal. You got to think the matchup out. It's actually one of my favorite matchups to do because it requires a lot of thought. Pod, not a good game 1. If it's trying to gain infinite life with Kitchen Finks and you have no way to really react to it and make it so that it can't keep doing that, not a good matchup. Game 2 and 3, it's better, but still not that great. It's just you've got a weakness against combo decks, and that's just that. Twin comes in later on, and this is a pretty good matchup if you have the good sideboard slots for it. You have a lot of removal in your deck, so you should be able to use that to your advantage. But you want to make sure that you will still get pressure in while being mindful that they will tap down your lands with the entering first trigger of the Deceiver Exarchs, and then on the next turn, then they'll just win because you don't have the mana to stop the Splinter Twin. So it's not the greatest matchup in the world, but it's all right. Living End, game 1, you're going to lose. Unless you can outrace them, which is few and far between. It's the same deal with the mid-range deck. You got to do a lot of early damage in before their turn 3, and then just win with reach before they can kill you. But the Living End matchup, not too great. After sideboard, if you hit your Silver Bolts, great. If you don't hit your Silver Bolts, you're not going to win. Point blank. Death and Taxes, great matchup through and through. You're going to have enough removal. You're going to be able to keep them off their creatures. You're going to be swinging for a ton of damage in the meantime. You're going to win. Merfolk, you're going to win so long as you make sure to prioritize removing their lords. After that, you can still swing. You're still probably going to get a good 1 mana creature down and keep swinging to put pressure on them anyways, even if you're not going first, so it's going to be fine. The Zoo matchup, like I said, not a good matchup because of your mana base and their creatures are hard to remove. The Storm matchup, game 1, awful. Game 2, if you get your Silver Bolt, good. If you don't, you're going to lose. Infects, actually a really great matchup. This is one of the few combo-esque decks that you've got a great matchup. You've got so much removal, you don't really need to worry about it. Delver, good matchup. You've got a ton of removal for their very few threats, and not only that, you're just got more threats than they can handle. You're going to be fine. Soul Sisters, game 1, not a good matchup. Game 2 and 3, if you have the Silver Bolts, it's pretty good. If you don't, it's pretty bad. The fact of the matter is Soul Sisters is built in a way that in the matchups that it's good against, it's just going to win. In the matchups it's bad against, it's not going to win. This is just one of those matchups that you're not going to have a great chance in. Burn, red deck wins. If it's Burn, you have not so great of a chance. If it's red deck wins, you've got a good chance because you've got a good amount of removal. It's weird because it's sort of the same deck, but it's not quite. You just got to remember that you got to preserve your life total, and you've got to be very, very careful with your fetches. You got to prioritize whether, do I need to do this mana so that I can survive the next turn and take 3 damage off of it, or can I just take 1 damage off the fetch land and still manage to save face? Something worth noting. What was I thinking? Right. Also, I didn't add it in here, but because I wanted to talk about it separate. There is a very good black card you can use, and that does shift this a little bit prioritize-wise, that you might prioritize black. But if you want to dedicate a lot of your sideboard to 4 Thoughtseize, 2 to 3 Inquisition of Kozilek's, you can do that, and that will help your matchup against combo tremendously. It will take those combo matchups from very bad to very good, but it does so at the fact that it's going to screw with your mana a little bit, and not that it matters too much, because in those combo matchups, it's going to be better to have the black early on, and it doesn't really matter having taking damage from your lands. But it will screw up that mana base a little bit, and it's going to also take a crap ton of your sideboard slots. It's going to be 6 to 7 sideboard slots so that you can afford to have that flip up. And it you might want to just have the padding against these other decks, or the other sideboard slots against the combo decks that are easier to deal with, that are more general, so that way you can apply it to a lot of other decks, like, for example, Deglamour is one of those versatile cards, or Destructive Revelry being one of those versatile cards. So it's worth thinking about. And before we move on to the lists, there are 2 very distinct kinds of lists when it comes to Domain Zoo. You're going to either get fast lists that want to just like do a flurry of light jabs before really smacking in there with burn and winning the game, and it's much more reminiscent of red deck wins. Or you are going to have a more constant pressure steamroller-esque Domain Zoo, which is the one I prefer. It deals it's forces a lot of plays, does a lot of catch-22s, and it feels like every turn you're doing something very meaningful that if the opponent does not react to it, you will win the game. Fast is cool because you have a very cool race option, but the constant pressure is also very cool because it just is like a steamroller. It will eventually kill that opponent. So let's go ahead and take a look at these 2 distinct lists. Let's first take a look at that fast list that I was talking about. It's going to be using things like Experiment 1, Goblin Guide, Curd Ape, Loomline, and Step Links to get a lot of early damage in, while doing a ton of damage with its burn spells, Bolt, Lightning Helix, Boros Charm, and Might of Lara, as well as Tribal Flames down here. Then its land base is very fast. Again, it's just, this is the sort of land base you're going to get. It's just fast, fast, fast. In the sideboard, it wants to make sure that it can continue that damage output, and it's got Grafdigger's Cage against the pod decks, sort of War and Peace because it deals more damage against control decks, Topo Orb against those twin pod decks, Blind Obedience against Eggs, which is at this point in time, it was this deck didn't win a PTQ, but it actually did win a PTQ. Excuse me, it won a PTQ, especially when Eggs was a big deck. Rest in Peace being one of those kill all the graveyard, Stony Silence against Pod and Affinity, Back to Nature against the Boggles deck that shows up every now and then, and a Path to Exile to really shore up the removal-esque kind of feel of it. The Steamroller version uses things like Deathrite Shaman, Geist of St. Taft for doing large chunks of damage, Noble Hierarch just because it needs extra mana ramp, Statcaster for doing double down on your burn spells, Step Links to do a ton of early game damage, and Tarmogoyf to finish up that mid-range damage. Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix, Path to Exile, all good stuff. It does take a little bit more of a controlling-esque, slower-paced version, so you're going to be doing 22 lands in this version. Elspeth, because landing in Elspeth in this deck will just straight up win you the game. Lingering Souls, because it's great as chump blockers and really good attackers. And Tribal Flames to finish up that burn suite. The sideboard is a little interesting in the fact that it's Wear and Tear, and I actually need to rewrite that so it's clear. If you bear with me for 2 seconds. Wear and Tear. It's got the obligatory two graveyard slots, Aven Mind Sensor to really help out against the Pod and the Tron matchups. Ancient Grudge, which is amazing against the Affinity decks, Path to Exile against the mid-range decks, Remand against the combo decks, Wear and Tear against more affinity and extra stuff. Molten Rain and Sowing Salts, all great land hate cards. It should be noted that this is the Channel Fireball list, and you may see them repping it come next GP and Pro Tours that are coming up for Modern Season. And this is the list I'm going to be using tonight, so that you guys can see how a Domain Zoo works. We're going to play a quick game, see if we can play maybe 2 games, and try to get you guys used to the deck. Key and Domain Zoo. Play. Guess that's not gonna work out either. Join. Load deck. Domain Zoo. Play. Just keep clicking all the things possible. Oh hey man, that worked out finally. Alright. Rolling 7. Is it high enough? Well, he takes a mulligan, which isn't awful for us. He takes another mulligan, which is great for us. He still hasn't rolled. Roll. Okay. Alright, so we got a hand with no land. We're not going to be able to keep that, but we can keep this. The question is, though, do we want to put a Deathrite Shaman out there, or do we want to put a Stepplinks out there? We probably want to put a Stepplinks out there. He's mulliganing down to 4. 3. Alright, whatever. This will be a bad game for him, but we'll show you exactly what we need anyways. So again, we're going to open up with the Temple Garden, then followed up with the Steam Vent with our Scalding Tarn, put out the Stepplinks, and pass the turn. See? I don't think I said my name. Why, yes, I am. Working on the Domain Zoo primer right now. Actually. I guess the guy recognized me. That's pretty funny. So there's a lot of people that like know me online, and nice to meet you too, dude. That know me online and then don't actually know me in real life, and then when I start playing things that have like pumpkin heads on them because my girlfriend's altered them, they start questioning if I'm Lantern or not, and yes, I am. But it's pretty funny. To have this reputation of being sort of zoo obsessed. Anyways, the reason why I played the Stepplinks first was so that I can get some extra damage, and getting to Lingering Souls is not super necessary on turn 2, and I'd rather get more damage in, especially if I draw an extra fetch land, which I did. So we're going to go ahead and crack this right now. Get ourselves a Steam Vent, because it's the correct order of things. Let me see here. Where's that Steam Vents before I look at what this guy is saying? I remember a lot of people from their signatures on MTG Salvation. Oh, yeah. So the question here is whether we want to get out a Tarmogoyf, which will help us attack for 2 currently, or whether we want to put out a Deathray Shaman. I think we want to put out a Tarmogoyf so that we can get the most bang for our buck. And that also means if he does any sort of removal spell that's an instant, our Goyf survives it. Because a weird Goyf rules that if it has a land and a sorcery in the graveyard, if they do an instant... if there's a land or land and something else in the graveyard, it doesn't really matter. As long as there's 2 things in the graveyard and one of them's not instant, and you target a Goyf with Bolt, it will survive it because it's going to gain its static ability of gaining into be a 3/4 before it dies, and that also includes things like Pyroclasms. If there's a land in the graveyard and so on Pyroclasms, your Goyf is going to survive because it's going to become a 2/3. So what I'm going to do here, and this is a little weird, I don't need to fetch right now. Well, I guess I can. But this we'll see if he forces the play. And I don't need to fetch right now because I'd rather put out Deathrite Shaman. So I'm going to not crack that fetch land in case he's got the Bolt for my Step Links. I'd rather him take 4 damage instead of 2 damage if he bolts it after I crack it right now. So I'm like gonna wait. And that's something worth noting is that in this kind of deck you can actually wait to do the damage on Step Links if you can think you can afford it. Which is what I can do. I can put down the Godless Shrine and be able to do that again next turn. Dodges around Bolt really easily, and he's got a red mana, and he might have a Bolt in hand. He's got 3 cards in hand. He was able to shuffle around for that Serum Vision. So, if he tries the Bolt right now, I'll go ahead and crack it and keep it alive. But it's like forcing that play. 2 manas. Far and away. Please placing far. Return target card to its owner's hand. Yeah, why not? And I'm actually going to pay for this now, too. So that way I can, I can still attack with the Step Links and have Bolt and Tarmogoyf stuff open, especially if I want to do the Deathrite Shaman as well. So again, I might be a little conservative with Step Links, but he's got red mana. He's obviously doing a lot of control removal elements. I'd rather hit for 2 than hit for nothing. We've got him at a point where I can just burn him out, so I'm going to go ahead and just risk the Tarmogoyf here. And if it hits a counterspell, I don't mind. So let's see what he does here. Does an Inquisition of Kozilek. Huh. Sure, I'll let him see what I got. If he wants to stop the Bolt, that's fine. I'd rather do that so I can hit 2 damage off of the the step links anyways. He doesn't have a bolt in there at all yet. So I'm going to crack it in the main phase. And what am I cracking it for? Probably something that gives me white or red as well. Well, red. We're going to get red regardless. So let's just get this. Get some redundancy for this Deathrite Shaman. What did that do? Weird. Did my thing just glitch out? No! That sucks. If we can't connect that, it'll really suck. Reopen. Go. Weird. Right click there. Alright, and we're going to attack here. Next phase, we're going to go ahead and try to win the game, I guess. Go. Good game. GG. Alright, so against the Grixis control, what are we going to try to do? We want to make sure that the game doesn't go really long and that we don't play into the removal spells. That's really the best things that we can do here. We can also Molten Rain, which I'd rather do on when I'm on the play to screw them. I'd rather not do it while I'm on the draw. So I'm not going to side in that. I'm going to leave the main deck as is. I could maybe do a Nil Spell Bomb if I was suspecting him to do a lot of like graveyard stuff. But I'm going to leave the main deck as is, actually. On the play, if I have to play again, I'm probably going to cut... I'm trying to think here. Maybe my Path to Exiles for the Molten Rain so I can be a little bit more aggressive. And the Molten Rain there will allow me to like keep him off of things like Cryptic Command. And casting big bomby threats. Again, this is not going to work since we don't have land in it. And this will be fine. This will be fine. It's got a Tarmogoyf, which is not the best thing in the world to play against this deck. Oh, but it's got a Noble Hierarch now, and that's fantastic. So we're going to do the same play that we normally do. Temple Garden into Steam Vents, and we're going to play the Noble Hierarch. And hopefully he will not have the counter mana open, and we'll have Geist to St. Taft. We're going to play right into that counter spell, even if he does, because it's worth doing. The fact that if he can't counter it, he is screwed. If he can counter it, then our Tarmogoyfs become much bigger. It's really, you just got to value what's the difference between the power and risk scenario. The difference is, against this Grixis deck, especially one with all this targeted removal, and and he's probably keeping up, if he's, like, the way I'm reading his mana right now, if he's willing to go to Serum Visions, it might be that he's trying to get something else. Oh, like a land. Yeah, we win this game. Point blank. Alright, so there goes the Steam Vents. We're going to go ahead and tap it all. It ain't no ponder. Alright, so then getting that Geist of St. Taft out there, this is a bad tempo switch on his end, because me being so high up on the totem pole now really sucks. I really hope he gets his land that he's looking for here. I don't want to just miserably beat him. Geist of St. Taft just sometimes win, man. That's worth noting in Zoo, is that while I'm generally preferring small, more consistent Zoo, Geist of St. Taft is, if you play it, just sometimes kicks ass. And there's really nothing anyone can do about it. And so from now on, I'm going to try to play with the Lightning Helix mana open in case he tries to, like, Snapcaster or something. So that way I can clear the field. And drawing this land was pretty good, too. Just allows me to be able to cast the Deathrite Shaman or even a Tarmogoyf. Let's see, did he take it correctly? 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 1, 2. And by the way, Noble Hierarch does give a buff to this because it attacks alone. That is something stupidly ridiculous about Noble Hierarch and Exalted Trigger. And I'm just gonna cast a, I think I'm just gonna cast the Deathrite Shaman here. Although, let's see, if I cast the Tarmogoyf, then I'm gonna be looking at least a 3/4 Tarmogoyf. I think I'll cast the Tarmogoyf. He could full on, what do you call it? I guess he did not have the Spell Snare. But I'm not too worried about the Spell Snare happening. If you're debating on cracking that fetch land, man, that's pretty bad. I mean, it's completely telling that you don't have land. I mean, aside from that you missed a land drop on turn 2. But it can be pretty crappy sometimes. And Tarmogoyf lives through a bolt as well, so it's worth noting. I hope he doesn't end up going for the bolt. He's going for the bolt. Oh, he's going for the bolt for the Noble Hierarch. Ah. Tricksy, tricksy. Okay, so that's why I used the Noble Hierarch mana right away and kept these 2 mana open. Because it would be actually easier for me to keep this mana open for the Lightning Helix. And I'd rather have the Noble Hierarch used right away so that if that bolt happens, I'm not left out in the wind. Yeah, 4/5. Woo, Goyf, 4/5. Dead Goyf. Still hitting for 6 damage. Because Geist of St. Taft is the best burn spell available. How do we want to tap this, actually? I guess that is what I want to do. I think I'd rather not play into a sweeper, to be honest with you, and just pass the turn. Because he could play a sweeper, and yes, Tarmogoyf would survive, but he might have something like, I don't know, weirder. I'm pretty sure I got this game cinched. The moment that I start holding cards in a zoo deck is when you know that, oh, player sacrifices a creature. Oh, that sucks. Yeah, there's nothing I can do about that. Sure, whatever, that's fine. Away. It's target player sacrifices a creature, yep. So I played right into that like an idiot. You really should not be holding stuff back, but I did, because I felt like I'm just also playing around, so I'm making bad mistakes. But here's where we play the Deathrite Shaman. And we're going to play the Deathrite Shaman off of the Blood Crypt mana. And Deathrite will single-handedly win me the game if he doesn't do anything about it with the Lightning Helix backup. But I'm not going to blow the Lightning Helix on his end step because I'd rather be able to block the... I'd rather kill anything that he blocks with his Tarmogoyf. Huh. Yeah, there's really nothing I can do about that. So now that he put out 2 creatures, which I wasn't really expecting, he's got that red elemental. I'm going to get rid of the Pyromancer now. Oh, Snapcaster works there, nice too. Snapcaster get our Lightning Helix back. Probably could have set up bad blocks there, but I don't mind. He's just gonna have to slow roll block, and that's fine with me too. I think I'd rather do it on his turn. Let's look at his spells that he's got in here. He's got a bunch of Serum Visions in there to flashback. Terminate really is the worst thing, as well as Bolton Far and Away. Trying to think what he could use, really, to start putting this game down. I guess the Bolt is the worst thing that he could be doing. And then I could eat Far and Away next turn. I could flash in a Snapcaster right now and cast it, which is fine if he ends up trying to do that. Drawing the land card was not what I wanted to see here. We're just going to go ahead and attack straight out. He's going to have to 1-for-1 trade everything, so it'll turn his, it's going to turn his, it'll like turn his block ratio down. He's only got 2 cards in hand. I'm pretty sure I can just outpace him with the Tarmogoyf unless he's got removal, which if he had removal, I believe he would have used it earlier. I'm going to go ahead and show that I have no cards in hand because, I mean, he's pretty expecting me not to have any cards in hand anyways, and I'd rather do the deck thin. Deck thinning has a very small % chance of actually doing anything worth noting, but I'd rather have a small % chance at getting top decking a burn spell here than not top decking it. And if he wastes like a Shadow of a Doubt on this, I really have no cares in the world about that. He's got the mana to block here with the Creeping Tar Pit, but not win the game with the Creeping Tar Pit, so I'm not too worried. Yeah, Terminate is what he's going to have to pull out. Deathrite Shaman is very, very valuable here anyways. It means he's got to get a removal spell for it, or he will just lose the game. Drawing that land was not helpful for him. Nah, he's got the Bolt. So I'm on top deck mode. He's not yet, but that's fine. He's trying to get in some punch damage now that he's got that Snapcaster. Let's see if he's got the counterspell. He does not have a counterspell. That's worth noting. He might have, maybe he has Mana Leak, and that's his counterspell, but that's not that great. He's trying to get in there for damage. I don't know what that means. 2, 3. While leaving up a blocker on 2? No, he's not leaving up any blockers. Might just mean that he's worried that I'm gonna top deck a burn and kill him, which is very likely. Scalding Tarn. Ugh. I'm not actually gonna put the Scalding Tarn out there because I don't want to crack it. The man got removal, gotta admit. He might have a Bolt to finish the game. If he does, that would be awesome for him. Well, I got a Bolt now, so we'll see if he's got a counterspell. Yeah, I don't even have any basics. Good game, man. Good game. Close the whole way up. Alright, so we're going to put the Molten Rains in there, and like I said, I'm going to take out the 2 Path to Exiles. So I'm taking out the Path to Exiles because here I want to be a little less reactive and a little bit more dedicating where the game goes. And the Path to Exile wouldn't have really done much. The Molten Rain would have actually done a lot more, especially early on. And this is a good hand. I mean, it doesn't look like it, but it's jam-packed with stuff that we can use. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this, because it'll do a lot of damage. And I don't want to like lose cards against a guy who's already keeping these in control deck. I'm going to be fetching a little weird here, just so you guys know. And that's because I've got the Step Links in hand, and I want to be able to use my fetches to their most advantage. But I'm going to be keeping up a turn 1, keeping up the turn 2 Naya colors, just not with the Steam Vents. Ah, smart move. Ugh. That makes my hand suddenly way worse. but it makes the Tarmogoyf a lot better. Tarmogoyf is now a 3/4, and if he doesn't have like a Termite or something along those lines, I hurt him. I hurt him. Who knows? And we could top deck that Singleton of Elspeth and just win the game, because Elspeth would probably win this game. Alright, finally the guy takes his turn. While I answer a text message. Pyro! Alright, I really need to get removal against that guy right away. And drawing more lands is not removal. I have a totally empty hand here. What? This is stupid. Lols. I'm gonna go ahead and concede. Alright. Yeah, that was a pretty bad thing, getting nothing but lands at the end. Especially, yeah, that he had the mana leak, so there's just nothing I could do about it. Yeah, whatever, man. That's what happens, and that's how this cookie crumbles today. The game, I do believe, could have been beaten. It's just that sometimes in this deck, like I said, it's very explosive, but it's very inconsistent, though. So yeah, it's just very inconsistent sometimes, and it's worth noting that that's what you're doing. Sometimes you just blow out games, like I said when I did my thing, but then sometimes you don't get it, you know, and that's worth noting. So anyways, guys, thanks for checking out this primer. I'm gonna leave it at this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions or want to talk about your deck at all, go ahead and make an account on MTG Salvation. You can talk to me, and you can talk to anyone else who's on there and really likes playing Domain Zoo.